it's okay to take the time to take a breath. Right? For anybody who's active duty and continues wanting to be active duty that's hearing this, when you come back from something, let's say deployment, and they give you that block leave, go take it.
Hello, this is Tab Bartley, and you are listening to the Oath We Took podcast, the show that tells the Marine Corps story through the Marines that serve. I'm joined today by Matthew Morris. He is the reason for this podcast. I know so many amazing Marines who hesitate to tell their stories. Their stories hold so much power and so many life lessons. Oftentimes, though, they go untold. Not every Marine story is the same. What is the same is the oath that we all took. Hello, this is Tab Bartley, and you are listening to the This week, I am honored to have Matthew on the podcast to share a piece of his story. Thank you for coming on board.
Thanks for having me, Tab.
And I think this is super cool because your wife actually reached out to me on LinkedIn, and that's how we connected. She was like, oh, my husband would be great for this. So I love that. I was super excited when someone was like, advocating for their husband and being like, get my husband on. So that's a super cool way to start. So
Shannon's pretty awesome like that. When the Oath We Took starts doing Navy vets as well, I'm gonna flip the script and you're gonna get her on.
For certain, which will be happening probably season 3. I don't think I'll ever open it up for all the services just because my niche, right? But my husband is a Greenside Corpsman. And so
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Oh.
So the Navy will be introduced just down the line.
I'll make sure she knows that.
Perfect. So the first question I ask everybody is, why did you decide to join the Marine Corps?
I decided to join the Marine Corps because I wanted to fly. So when I was about 10 years old, I was at an air show with my grandfather, who was a Korea vet, and we were walking the flight line, and there was an AH-1 Whiskey Cobra parked on the line. And for anyone who doesn't know, the whiskey is God's gift to destruction. And as I was walking, the Gatling gun, the cannon on the front, was about eye level with me. And I look over and I'm like, that's amazing. And I'm holding my grandpa's hand, and I just squeeze his hand. And from then on, my mindset was like, I'm going to figure out what that thing is, because I didn't know what it was. It looked like a transformer to me. And I'm going to figure out what that is. I'm going to figure out how to do it and fly it and make it work. And then from there, that set me on the trajectory. When I was 15, I joined the United States Naval Sea Cadet Corps. And I did every aviation-based training with them. I actually got my ground pilot's certificate, which is all the flight school you have to go to before you get your license. So I did that. And then when I went to college, I went to Texas A&M University through the Corps of Cadets. And when I was in college, I got my private pilot's license, did quite a bit more aviation-based training, got my air contract through the Marine Corps. And then I commissioned out of Texas A&M and went to flight school in the Marine Corps and got my wings on September 11th, 2015 to go fly the AH-1 Whiskey Cobra.
How powerful was that? How many emotions? Just
all of them.
All of them. And did your grandfather get to see that whole progression?
He did not. He actually passed away not long after that. But his wife, my grandmother, who was hugely instrumental in everything that was my aviation career, she actually was the one who, when I got to college, I came home one summer and I said, I'm about this far from getting my private pilot's license. And she said, well, is this what you want to do for the rest of your life? And I said, yeah. And she said, okay, then your job is to go get that license. And you're going to work for me in the summers, and I'm going to fund you getting your pilot's license. And she was one of the first people that I took up when I got my license. And we flew over the family ranch. And, I dip a wing down and, here she, a lot of people you take flying in the little Cessnas that are just like rickety as all get out or just, no, she's sitting there cool as a cucumber, leaned back in the seat, just like, oh, that's the ranch house. Oh, look, that's the pond. I said, hey, you want to do a low flyover over your house? And she said, you make sure you fly low enough to wake George up from his nap. So George was my step grandfather, who was a former Marine in World War II, and he was. So when my biological grandfather passed away, my grandmother remarried a gentleman by the name of George Marty. James Morris was my biological grandfather, and George was a big push for me joining the Marine Corps, because originally I had planned on joining the Navy. But Navy didn't have Cobras in their training pipeline at that time. And so little back and forth there, that's why I ended up going Marine Corps. And, dress blues.
Hey, you can't beat them. I mean,
yeah. So that was the why of why I joined. And funny, it wasn't until Veterans Day, a couple of years that I was in on active duty, and my mom was going through some of the family photos, and I'm looking through it, and I see all of these men in uniform that I've never seen these pictures of before, or I've never been conscious of. And she's like, oh yeah, that's your great grandfather. Oh, that's your great great uncle. That's your other great uncle. And we traced our lineage back to military service to the oldest person in the family that we have, who we have record of his service, was my great great grandfather, who was actually a Texas Ranger and who fought against Pancho Villa during the border wars. And so, I have a photo album of grandfathers, great grandfathers, uncles, great uncles. Even the youngest closest to me is my cousin, who is also a Marine. And I remember I was young, probably 5 or 10, and he came home from boot camp, and he had the classic 1990s pain is weakness leaving the body Marine Corps t-shirt.
yes.
With the skull holding the K-bar in its teeth. Still have that t-shirt.
I feel like almost realizing it, or like fully understanding it once you've become a Marine, almost makes it hold more power to like see that legacy, as where like, as a kid, like even if you hear that, I don't know if it holds the same capacity as like, wow, you fully know what it means then. And
Sure.
to see that lineage, like that's awesome. So what was your kind of Marine Corps career like? How long were you in? What were some of the best experiences you had in the Marine Corps?
I commissioned in 2012, and from 2012 to 2013, we were on a delay entry. And so I actually spent 9 months in the inactive ready reserve, which I didn't know that was a thing. But long story short, you sign your contract, and then the Marine Corps says, okay, you can wait, and you sit and you wait. And so we delayed. Then I went to the basic school in Quantico. From the basic school, I went to flight school. Flight school was in 3 different places. It was in Pensacola, Florida, Corpus Christi, Texas, and then back to Milton, Florida, which is where all the rotary wing operate out of. It's about 45 minutes from Pensacola. And then from there, I went to the Replacement Aircrew Squadron, the RAC, HMLAT 303 out of Camp Pendleton. From 303, I trained with HMLA 469. We did a UDP and a KMEP. So we went to Okinawa and we went to Korea, came back, when I came back, right after I came back, I had my first major service injury. I had a crash on a jet ski and had to have one of my foot rebuilt. That was the beginning of the end of my flying career. Fast forward from there about a year-ish, and I was standing on a board in DC in front of 3 colonels, 2 of which had been former commanders of my squadron, and we did the round table and said, okay, flying's not going to be for you anymore. So I had to redes. And that was right after my divorce. So I came back from my deployment. We signed the paperwork for my divorce about 6 months after that. And so this is the first message that I'll harp on for Marines is when you have trauma, right, it does not always equate to you rolled over an IED, right? This was physical damage coupled with emotional damage from having to go through all of that. But the counseling that I received at that point was I went back into the squadron. One of the guys that I was with, I said, hey man, or he said, what'd you do this weekend? I said, I got a divorce. He goes, oh, that sucks. And that was it. That was the entire summation of he's ending basically a decade-long relationship, right? And then we went right back to work,
And
And
you're going through all these other transitions too. Like like you were saying, like it's not even just one thing, because for those who aren't like familiar, there's subcultures within the Marine Corps, and being a pilot and being aviation is a different culture. There's just some differences. And now you've essentially been told your marriage is done and your career as you know it's done. And
yep. And so fast forward from there, about a year, I've redesed into what's called ComStrat. And ComStrat was a newly emerging MOS where they took combat camera and public affairs and they merged them together. And I said, what opportunities are there going to be for me? I was not, because of the injury, I was not allowed to go into a combat arms MOS, which was another just really big gut punch. Because my mission when I joined the Marine Corps was to go fight, right? I was going to fight with a different type of war machine. Marines fight with rifles. We fought with Hellfire, right? And so being told that I couldn't do that was, but again, you just, okay, got it. Let's keep grinding. Give me another task. Give me another job. For me, it was give me another deployment. I came back, and within 30 days of finishing this new school, I was in Kuwait. And this was my first rotation on the ground, first deployment on the ground. It was an Army command. It was CJTF OIR, so Operation Inherent Resolve. And that took a big adjustment of this culture is completely different. The operations are completely different. We call it a post, not a base. My colonel was the director of public affairs, and my for the Army, and the Marine Corps colonel, who was the director of the SAJOA, which is the Combined Joint Operation Area, was Marine. So I had an Army colonel telling me one thing, and a Marine colonel telling me another thing. So that was a unique opportunity to learn how to manage personalities.
Which I feel is very much like that ComStrat public affairs, like where you're constantly being stuck, because in those roles, you're playing such a big advisory role. But a lot of times, like commands don't want to hear it, and they don't want a part of it, and they don't want to do this, and they don't want to do that. I think that there's a lot of in the civilian sector, I don't think that there is as big of a push as there is in the military, and specifically the Marine Corps, of most often combat correspondence and ComStrat. They're not seen in the most positive light. The value added, a lot of times, if somebody hasn't had a good experience, they've had a very bad experience. It seems to be like one or the other. And so how did you kind of face those challenges, especially when you're new into the job too, and doing that job? How did you approach that?
The wrong way. And I say that because I went into it with that exact same mindset, like fucking public affairs. And now I'm in it, right? Now I'm on the other side of the desk. And my negativity wasn't towards the MOS. It wasn't towards the soldiers that I was working with. It was to all of the civilian correspondents, all of the reporters, all of the that I went into the mindset thinking they are just waiting. They are just waiting to hook me on something. They are trying to back the boss into a corner, get him to say something that they're going to twist and turn around, and then boom, you're going to see it on Military Times the next morning. And so I had my guard up from the minute that I walked in the door. And that was the wrong mentality to have, because it kept me from building relationships with the reporters early. Eventually I got there, right? I had one good mentor. He was lieutenant colonel in the Army. And one day he said, look, man, we're all on the same team. Even they are on the same team. And if you feel like it's going that direction, say it. Say, look, this interview is not going the way that we want it to go. But I was so new and so gung-ho that it took me time to get into that. And so my reflection looking back on that was, don't forget the lessons that you learned going into the new job, but go into the new job receptive. Go into the new job willing to absorb. And if you get that raise on the hair raise on the back of your neck feeling, then go for it. But don't go in with the hair already up, right?
And I think that is great advice, especially like in that career field, but especially like the Defense Information School is an amazing school. But what you're talking about is something that you can't really experience that there. It is very much something you have to experience once you're doing the job. And I think a challenge that Marine Corps wise that is different to, and again, I don't know how much the merger changed it, but like when we were in, public affairs was your communication strategy. We didn't get the mentorship that Combat Camera did because they had so many more Marines. And so a lot of times we would go to events completely by ourselves, and Combat Camera would have 2, 3, Marines doing the job, being able to mentor. And a lot of what we did was like, you kind of had to figure it out on your own. And I think that advice was like really good. And I don't think I ever got that advice. It was thrown to the wolves and then you learn it. But that advice, I think, is something that anybody in that like public affairs, communication strategy, like media, journalists, especially in the military, can really take and utilize and use it sooner to be successful sooner.
Yeah. And the biggest difference the other element there was I showed up in January of 2020. March 2020, COVID hit, and Camp Arif John, which is not a super big and equipped base, locked down. So everything, all of the amenities, right, that kind of keep you from going crazy on deployment, the gym, the chow hall, all the little restaurants that are on base, like the Pizza Hut and that kind of stuff, shut down. Completely shut down. And we were on a rotation cycle that was, you went from your barracks room or your hooch to the command office, and then to eat, you would pick up an MRE. And that was about 3 months we stayed on there. And if you needed to leave post, you had to have an 06 approval letter. You had to get the colonel to sign off on you leaving the post. So just think about that logistically for a minute. For any civilians that are listening, that's the equivalent of you going to, in my case, the CEO, the boss of the company, who is probably 3 countries away, and saying, hey boss, I need to leave base so that I can conduct this meeting on another base. And that was a unique opportunity for creative learning.
Hello, listeners. The Oath We Took podcast can now be heard on Wreaths Across America Radio. Download the iHeartRadio app and tune in to Wreaths Across America radio station every Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. As always, I challenge you to not think a Marine, but listen to their stories instead. And especially yet again in a career field that historically we get responsibilities sooner and at younger rates, and we're doing things more independently than I think some of the other military occupations in the Marine Corps because of the requirements of the job and the limit of the people doing it. And so it's not even like that's a structure that was really even in place in ComStrat, right? Like that extreme oversight either. So you're also dealing with, and being alone, just dealing with everything. How is your mental health and all of that, and like your physical health, and what were some of the ramifications outside of the struggles of doing the job?
Physical health was great, because as soon as they shut the base down and they closed the gym, they closed every fitness facility, I just started running again. And I was like, okay, I can, make this work. And so when I came back from Kuwait, man, I was lean as hell. Headspace, I don't know of anybody who comes back from deployment just full of sunshines and rainbows, but I didn't start rebuilding relationships until I was a long time back. And it was a lot of, I'm not going to acknowledge these things, which I know I'm probably the only Marine and only professional who's ever come back from a stressful situation, and rather than putting the work in to heal the internal and external scars, I just buried it really deep. I'm probably the only person who's ever done that. But the reflection that I'll give for maybe somebody who that resonates with is, it's okay to take the time to take a breath. Right? For anybody who's active duty and continues wanting to be active duty that's hearing this, when you come back from something, let's say deployment, and they give you that block leave, go take it. Go do something that is unrelated, completely unrelated to the Marine Corps, right? Because you've got to let your mind reset, right? You've got to adjust. Same thing on the civilian side, right? Hey, I just finished working this major project that's taken 60, 70, 80, 90, 100-hour work weeks from me for the last 3, 4, 5 months. This has been my whole life. I finally finished the project. The brief goes as good as it's going to go, and we're task complete on this. Don't just jump into the next one. Take a week, take 2 weeks, right? And I would also encourage that when you do that, if you have family, go be with your family, but carve out a chunk of that time to go be by yourself, right? And I'm not a couple of days, 2 or 3 days to be alone. Because if you've been on deployment, you hadn't been alone at all. You've been sharing a room with 50 other dudes. You've been sharing a bathroom with 50 other dudes or gals or people, humans, right? You walk from a room full of people to another room full of people to another room full of people, right? If you're an outside the wire operation, you're always with people. And these are people that you probably like or not, you know.
Man.
But the fact of the matter is that you're always with someone. You're never alone, right? So when you come back from whatever it is, when you task complete whatever it is, go be by yourself for a little while and then go be with your family, right? So those are things that I did not do. Learn from my experience. So that way, when you come back and it's time for the next thing, there will always be a next thing, you are reset. Also, whatever your therapy is, and therapy is taken on a larger meaning now. I don't necessarily say therapy has to be you sitting on the couch talking to a mental health professional. Can be, if that's the way it works for you, but it doesn't have to be. Whatever your therapy is, whether it's surfing, whether it's going to the range, whether it's going to the driving range if you're a golfer, right? I don't care. That thing that you do, that if you do it great or if you do it terribly, it doesn't matter. You're just enjoying yourself doing it. Go do it. Spend a week doing it. Do it till you're sick of it. And then you say, okay, all right. Because you probably didn't get to do it when you were gone, right? So now we'll fast forward that week. We came back from the deployment and I changed commands again. We had a very unfortunate falling out with our commander, the unit that I got back to, and he was removed from command. And the new commander who came in was not removed from command, but was fired up. And that I had never experienced that before, but the upper echelons who had brought this person in basically had to have somebody to fill the command seat for the person who'd been removed. And I don't know how they picked this person. They just spun the wheel and said, okay, here's a warm body, let's go. And it went from really bad, like blatant racism, blatant sexism, sexual assault at the command level to the complete flip of micromanagement, undermining junior Marines, prevention of training, because the knee-jerk reaction was, okay, we got in trouble for this, so now we have to be super controlled. And the only other the option at that point was, okay, if I stay here, I'm gonna get mixed into this. And so I said, okay, I'm gonna go to another MOS school. And that was to learn OIE, Operations in the Information Environment, which is another emerging field. If you have the opportunity, whoever's listening, to endeavor into OIE, I recommend you do it, because that is the direction that not just the Marine Corps, but the entire Department of Defense is going right now, right? Conventional warfare is always going to be a thing, but information, which has always been a key factor, has now been recognized as a warfighting principle, right? And the strategy of utilization of information is now finally is now being trained specifically. And OIE was unique for me because it was the first time that I got to train with a recon unit. And that was my final deployment. I went with Force Recon, and watching the difference between an in-placed force reconnaissance unit who operate on a very unique set of rules from a non-deployable Marine information unit was a shock. And I had already been in the Marine Corps for almost a decade at that point, and this was the first time that I got to see this. And so, lesson with that is when you have an opportunity to do something outside your regular scope, even if it's not aligned with your career path, man, do it. Do it. Go learn. Go take that chance. And if it goes well, awesome. And if it doesn't go the way you want, you still have your fallback. Right? So, and then right after that was when I met Shannon, who is the dopest wing woman on the planet. And shortly after that was when I had my motorcycle wreck. And the motorcycle wreck was what was the beginning of the end of my active duty Marine Corps career. So 2 lessons that I will tell you there is when you find the right woman, you will know. You absolutely will know. And be careful because other people will also know, and they will try and steal her from you. So you've got to fight, prep that fight. The other piece is if you're going to ride a motorcycle, you got to wear your armor. Period. I don't care if you're making a grocery run and it's a 30-second ride. Boots, riding pants, armor on the shoulders, full face helmet, and gloves. The only reason that I am alive is because I was in full gear. If I had been wearing a skull cap, my head would be splattered all over Highway 76 in Oceanside, California. So make sure that you do it.
How was that transition, especially dealing with a wreck like that and a traumatic event like that, on top of like transitioning out of the Marine Corps is just, honestly, it's traumatic. I don't care what anybody says, it is traumatic. You're losing so many things, or it feels like you're losing so many things. You're feeling things, like you said, you're processing things that you never processed. Like, how was that transition?
Okay. So from the day that I hit the ground on the bike to the day that I was separated was almost a year. And I was on a med board for the wreck, and Shannon and I had taken leave that weekend, and Sunday night at 6:30 p.m. I get a call from my boss, which is never good. If your boss ever calls you at 6:30 on a Sunday, just brace. And she told me that my extension for the medical board, which is supposed to be a guarantee, was denied by Headquarters Marine Corps, and that as of the previous Friday, 2 days prior, I had been separated. So all of the transition readiness, the mandatory TRS prep, all of the management of your leave, all of the things that you're supposed to do, you take your SIF gear and all that stuff, which I was supposed to have 6 months to finish, just stopped. Didn't happen. And in addition to that, the med board was canceled, which meant that I lost all of the work that we had done for the to process with the VA to get the disability. And so that 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 was the big, out of all of the things that I did in the Marine Corps, the moments where I felt like, hey, I thought you had my back on this. That was the harshest realization for me out of almost 2 decades in a uniform, right? And the real kick of it was I communicated with headquarters Marine Corps, I communicated with my command, and no no one cares enough to do something unless it positively affects them. And again, I took this all the way up to headquarters Marine Corps. And the feedback that I got from the separations director was, there's nothing that I'm going to do. Not there's nothing that I can do, nothing that I'm going to do. And the recommendation that I give to you is to file a complaint with I forget the name of the organization, records management, BCNR. So the Bureau of Corrections for Naval Bureau of Corrections Naval Records. Acronym might be incorrect, but point is that it's the government organization that if something happened to you, if you were wronged in some way while you were active duty, they assist you in it. So I had to go to Lawyers Serving Warriors, submit my claim. Then I had to submit to the BCNR, which it's still undergoing. And the fact with that process is very blatantly on their assistance portal, they say, anticipate this will take anywhere from 10 to 18 months. Right? So now, as negative of a situation as that was, that silver lining, we've made the phone call. I went in, I found out what I found out, came back, and oh, by the way, Shannon's 3 months pregnant at this point.
Oh, yes. With your first child, correct?
Right. With our
So
baby.
first pregnancy, child, all of that. But I have to say, this isn't as unique as it sounds. I had a very similar thing happen to me. I was told 5 days before my EAS that my injury of organs falling out of my body wasn't life or death, and plenty of women live with it, and the VA could fix me. I wasn't going on a med board. So this is actually, it happens more often, and I'm really glad that you gave that resource for people, because I went the congressional inquiry route and my state officials decided they weren't going to do anything and that it wasn't their responsibility, even though that's literally their job. So I really appreciate that, the resources, because again, it sounds common, but it's one of those things that seems easier to not fight it, to not go down these paths. And like you said, you're alone. There is not support, because I was in the same situation. There was no support. It didn't matter who I talked to. There was nothing. Nothing. And so I think that's very important to note. But then, like you said, you guys also are pregnant with your first child while you were transitioning out of the Marine Corps. So
Yep.
how was that, and how stressful was that? And what did you guys do to figure it out? Because you're transitioning, right? There's nothing you can do to stop it.
Okay. So I want to correct my acronym. The organization is Board for Correction of Naval Records, BCNR. So put this out, whoever's listening, if something happened to you, if you got out under circumstances that were outside of your control, Board for Correction of Naval Records. I will mentally prepare you. It's a pretty lengthy packet. You can get your local a VA, not VA,
Veteran service officer.
Yep, you can get a VSO, or you can get the what's the, I'm blanking. What's the what's the organization that has the VFW? Thank you.
VFW, American
Yep,
Legion,
yep,
any of
yep,
the big five that
yep.
have accredited
Thank you.
VSOs.
Thank you. Ooh, that was tricky. They can assist you with it. I would encourage, if someone is in this situation where for any reason they left the service outside, for reasons outside of their control, get assistance with the process. I submitted all of mine. The baby's going to be probably 3 years old before I get an answer, but the fact is that's what you can use. So with all of the negative that came from that, after a few weeks of recaging my gyro, Shannon grabbed me and said, "You're free." And I didn't know what that meant. And she said, for the first time in your life, not just your adult life, but in your life, if you want to get in the truck and just drive, you don't have to ask permission. Check your tires, check your oil, check your blinker fluid, and let's go. And so at 4 months pregnant at this point, we loaded up my truck, we put a camper shell on the back, and we set out on a 10,000-mile road trip around North America. And I will be honest with you, at first, I was not in a good space because it was, we're driving through the cornfields of Indiana
Hey,
and Shannon's napping with baby, and I'm just thinking, where did I screw this up? Who was I supposed to have talked to? This is all my fault. Like, Marine Corps said, you're too broke to play with us anymore. Thanks for your service. You're out, right? But we finished the road trip, and then we make the decision, you know what? We've been in America a long time. So Shannon booked us a one-way ticket, and we flew from Chicago to Denmark for the music festival. And that started our 15-country tour of Europe.
while pregnant.
Oh, she's running this thing at 4, almost 5 months pregnant, right? So pregnant moms are capable moms. That's all I got to say. And we went all over. We saw places that neither of us had ever set foot in before. We got to experience things that nobody had ever experienced before. And the real reason behind it was because we were contemplating having the baby overseas, because there are some gaps in the American healthcare system, especially when it comes to maternity care. Maybe you have some personal experience on that, and we'll
We can do an episode with Shannon after she does hers.
Telling you need to. But our intent was to have the baby overseas, and we had an issue with the visas, so we had to come back. So that's why we're in Chicago now. But that post-service decompression time, and I'm still in it. God, do it, right? When you get out, go. Don't start looking for another job right away. Don't jump right into school. Don't throw yourself into the next thing that's going to allow you to just be distracted. Just like I was talking about, when you get back from deployment, take a week or 2 or 3 to decompress. When you leave a career of decades, and this is me talking to you retirees, you guys that this is all you've known, you have got to go and reset. Go far away. Like, we left the country for 3 months, and I have no doubt that if I hadn't have had somebody who had been through all of this giving me some very good coaching, I probably would have. Well, not probably, I would have. I had a job offer to go take over as the the COO of a firearms company. And I was like, okay, you're gonna be out Friday and put my suit and tie on Monday and go do this. And Shannon was just like, no, 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 no. And from all of that, from the travel that we've done, from the experience that we gained internationally and across the United States, it has given us the opportunity to put something together that I have zero doubt is a useful tool for new dads. It is think of it like a tactical dad guide. You remember MCDP1, Marine Corps Doctrine Publication 1, Warfighting, right? Fit in your cargo pocket, big pictures, small words, right? If you were an O, or if you were a E2 just coming off the parade deck, or if you were a 30-year multi-star, you could understand the principles of it. That's what I'm writing right now. Anybody can ingest it, whether you dropped out of high school or you have multiple PhDs. The content is receivable for first-time dads.
And why do you think it's so important to have something like that?
Because I didn't have one, right? We interviewed over 60 couples in our world travel. People that had been dating for a couple of weeks to the longest couple had been married 62 years, right? And if you're going to prioritize marriage, if marriage is something that you look at and say, this is going to be important for me, and parenthood, like I'm going to prioritize being a parent, you got to have something that you can turn to quickly, right? Not a 250-page what to expect when you're expecting book that leaves you feeling more nervous about the baby than when you started, or or a bumpin' book that's 300 pages long, right? And I ground through reading these novels, and I don't know how somebody who's working full-time with a kid on the way could ever ingest all of that information. So I took from right now, I'm on my 11th. My goal is to do 15 parent books and weed through all of I'm not going to say useless part, but all of the scare tactics, right? Hey, if this happens, you're gonna lose your baby. If this happens, your baby's gonna be blind. If this happens, it's terrifying. All of the scare things. I don't know if you've ever been on any parental social media page. The stories that you read are not, I had a home birth and my baby came out perfect and my husband kissed me on the forehead and everything was wonderful. It's this went wrong and this went wrong and this was terrible and oh my God, I'm terrified. And I don't. So the document that I'm putting together, the document that Shannon is editing and doing all of my imagery for, is going to be about 50 pages. It's going to have big pictures. It's going to have small words, and it's going to be designed for the mother or the father, right? You take this, you read through it. These are things that I practiced. I'm never going to tell somebody to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. Sorry, I was a Marine for far too long.
Yep.
So things that I did that Shannon looked back at me and said, I liked when you did that. I appreciated when you did that. This made me feel safe when you did that. This made me feel like you cared and wanted to be involved when you did that. Okay. Right. I'm no rocket scientist, right? But if I can do these things and my wife and mother of my baby says, I like when you did that, I'm going to venture that if another expecting dad applies a similar principle, or in some cases, I spell it out, do this thing, right? Do this thing.
Before going to go and collecting your money, do this.
Right. Step 1, show up, right? Be there. You don't have to do it perfect. You don't have to do it exactly right. But if you're there, you're at least there to make the mistake. And then you learn from the mistake. But if you're not there, you're not going to learn. Right.
And I will use this as an opportunity to, I guess, tease. So season 2 of the podcast, we are going to be doing some PMEs, OFP, if you know what that means. I'm not going to spell it out since we're going to be on the radio. OFP PMEs. And so this is my pressure ask of, I plan on asking you to be back on and we can deep dive into some of these topics, because Marines know how to teach things, and I just feel like we need that more. And so teaser, season 2, we will start having some of those episodes, but only from previous guests, because I first want you to know somebody's story to be able to trust what they say and to have that like backing. But so I will be inviting you back on, and as many books as you make and as many topics as you want to discuss, I will invite you and Shannon on so that we can do that, because I think it's super important to have those. The military and the Marine Corps specifically was so great at teaching things in a very simple way. How many times did you hear Barney style, Barney style, Barney style? It works. It does.
Yeah, you're right. How many hip pocket PMEs did you do when you're signal bending in the middle of the forest, right? Or on the sand?
Talk about anything. Give me a subject and I'll seem like I know everything about it, right? So with that, we are kind of coming to wraps. And before I ask the last question, I want to see if there's anything else that we didn't talk about that you would like to talk about, but with the knowledge of I will be having you back on so that we can get some, subject matter expert and professional development.
Okay. So Shannon did a phenomenal job of telling our story as we traveled, the things we experienced, people we talked to, and the information there is, to me, invaluable. If what I've said today resonates with you, if you are at a point in your life where you're navigating your transition, I don't care if it's military or not, I highly encourage you, go look at hoponandholdon.com. You can also do our Instagram at hoponandholdon. Everything that we did as we crossed multiple states and multiple countries is lined out there. Some of the mistakes that we made, actually quite a bit of the mistakes that we made, but that's how we learned. And if you want to talk to me or talk to Shannon, you probably want to talk to Shannon more, but shoot us an email, hoponandholdon@gmail.com. For the expecting dads, this is our newest Shannon designed Daddy AF t-shirts. Funny, the moms like them too. I chuckle at that, but that is our way of tying back into the vet community, right? I see you wearing this shirt. I know that you saw our story, and absolutely, in any way, if you are trying to navigate getting out, especially with your VA, we went through and are still going through that process. If you are stuck, if you are not getting where you need to go, if it's not working, if the help isn't there, you can shoot me an email. We'll sit down and we'll grind through it. We spent 2 hours last night going through Shannon's, so we are very, very well versed in the process, and one team, one fight.
I can't thank you enough for being on the podcast. And before we end, I'm going to ask the last question, which is, if you had to take the oath again, would you?
Is that knowing what I know now?
However you want to interpret it.
Yes, I would have, because as many moments as I look back and was angry on things, it made me who I am, right? When my daughter comes to me at some point and says, "Dad, I think I want to be a Marine." No! Just kidding. But when my daughter comes to me at some point in the future and says, Dad, I want to do this. I want whatever it is, military service, professional service, entrepreneurship. I can prepare her, right? I can tell her that, hey, it's not gonna just be dress blues and fast cars, right? And I can give her the information to make her choice. Baby girl's gonna be born any day now. Like we are waiting.
Oh, that's so exciting.
There are a lot of words: exciting, terrified. And it has already, she hasn't even hit the ground yet, but it's already changed my perspective, right? The truth to that is I went in thinking that every single Marine who was ever in a leadership position was always going to have my best interest at heart. And most, and some did, right? But if she doesn't understand not just how to take care of herself, but to take care of the people that are relying on her, and reliance goes up and down, right? That was one lesson that I didn't learn until a long time in, was I always thought the only people who need me are the people who are junior to me, are of a lower rank than me. But that's wrong. The people above you rely on you just as much as the people that are a lower rank than you, right? And learning that now, if I can put that lesson onto her, if I can find ways to teach her that in person as she's growing, and she understands that her worth is not reliant on other people's opinions of her. Her worth is reliant on her ability, her capability, and her confidence. Then she can make the decision for herself. She says, Dad, I want to go be a Marine. I'm going to say, okay, these are the things you need to know. Dad, I want to go start my own company. Okay, these are the things that you need to know. Dad, I want to go be an accountant and work a 9-to-5 job in a cubicle. Okay, honey, I will support you, but these are the things you need to know, right? And I think that the time that I served gives me a unique ability to give that perspective.
This is the Oath We Took podcast, and you just heard a piece of Matthew's story. You now know one more Marine and one more piece of Marine Corps history. His sacrifices matter. His service matters. His stories matter. Not every Marine story is the same. We didn't all join the Marine Corps for the same reason. What is the same is the oath we all took. An oath that easily could have ended in death, and for some, it did. So listeners, instead of asking you to thank a Marine for their service, I am going to challenge you to continue to listen to their stories instead.